Yes, well, I'd like to give you some more some good news, but I'm not going to. We're going to talk about the Bank of England, about how they have basically decided that you are going to be poor and you basically just have to put up with it and stop complaining. Now, before I do so, I'm going to quickly mention the website because, as you know, YouTube is evil and they have decided to demonetize us. So you should go over there and sign up for an account, even if you don't do a premium subscription. You can get a free account, and then you can stay in touch with us next time we get booted off for a week or permanently, because that's obviously going to be coming, because as I mentioned, YouTube is evil. Now, before I get into the meat and potatoes of this particular segment, I'm just going to remind you that I have been really ill for the last week, not been feeling good at all, and you know what? You've got some footage to play in the background while I make this simple point. Here's what I didn't do when I was ill. I did not shut 90-year-olds into solitary confinement so that they could spend their last year in agonising isolation. I didn't do that. I did not force any small businesses to close. I did not introduce any authoritarian movement controls on the population. And I did not start getting the police to baton people who were trying to assert their right of association. I didn't do any of those things. And the other thing that I didn't do while I was ill was I didn't run up a massive amount of debt and print a huge amount of money.
Yes, but do you have shares in Moderna?
Nope, didn't do that either.
Well, that's why you didn't do any of those things.
Yes. No, all I did was basically sit in a chair staring out the window, apart from in the afternoon when the sun came round, and then I put a cushion over my head.
So a bit like Joe Biden.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I spent the week being like Joe Biden. And one thing I certainly did not do is start hammering the self-destruct button on the economy. However, we have an elite who basically did decide to do that a couple of years ago, and now we're dealing with the fallout from it. And last week, the chief economist at the Bank of England basically decided to explain to us plebs that we are just going to have to accept being poor. Let's go to those comments now. Have we got those comments? Yeah, let's listen to this.
In the end, the UK, which is a big net importer of natural gas, is facing a situation that the price of what you're buying from the rest of the world has gone up a lot relative to the price of what you're selling to the rest of the world, which is mainly services in the case of the UK. And so that means you don't need to be much of an economist to realize if what you're buying has gone up a lot relative to what you're selling, you're going to be worse off. So somehow in the UK, someone needs to accept that they're worse off and stop trying to maintain their real spending power by bidding up prices, whether higher wages or passing the energy costs through onto customers, etc. And what we're facing now is that reluctance to accept that, yes, we're all worse off and we all have to take our share, to try and pass that cost onto one of our compatriots and saying, we'll be all right, but they will have to take our share too. That pass the parcel game that's going on here, that game is one that is just generating inflation. And that part of inflation can persist.
That just sounds like Stalin saying
Yes.
the failures of collectivization weren't really our fault. We all have to take our fair share.
There is so much wrong with that. I mean, first of all, his definition of inflation is all being turned around. I'm going to come to that later. The idea that it can all be, so basically what he's saying there is it can all be pinned on Putin.
No,
Because gas rises have been coming out. Well, first of all, whose policy was it to sanction that in the first place?
well, whose policy was it to sell off all our shell gas reserves? Who is
Yes.
stopping us from tapping just 10% of the North Sea oil reserves, which would make us
Yes.
energy independent for 50 years?
Shale, investment in nuclear, all of that
Yep.
stuff. And even without that stuff, well, why is the value? I mean, yes, partly it is because of the sanction policy that the same elites decided to implement, but it's also because we've diluted the value of the pound by printing so much of it. So there is that attempt to try and say, okay, through a series of policies that we guys have taken, you guys are going to have to be poorer. Stop complaining about it. Just accept that your wages aren't going to match your cost of living. So thoroughly disingenuous. Anyway, so here's the Telegraph article that did quite a good write up on it. I'm going to quote bits from this so we get a sense of it. Britons have to accept they are becoming poorer, a senior Bank of England official said, claiming that an unwillingness to accept the nation's downward mobility was fueling inflation. What a load of nonsense. He was said that businesses were trying to maintain their standards of living and profits by demanding higher pay or putting up prices.
His name's Hugh Pill.
Yes.
I hope it's a suppository.
He said that this parcel game was going on here. The game is that one is generating inflation, and that part of inflation can persist. Again, this is nonsense. Inflation is expansion of the money supply. That's what it is. And the prices rising are the downstream effects of that. But they need us to believe that it is otherwise, because otherwise we are not going to accept our lower standard of living, because the elites are stealing so much from us through their taxes and their excessive debt.
Well, otherwise we'll be blaming them rather than the suppliers. As Joe Biden keeps saying, we need to stop the energy suppliers from making too much profit in this time of crisis. It's like, no,
Yeah.
Joe, who constricted the supply of gas and who increased the supply of money and who did the exact same thing over here in the UK?
Well, it is literally US policy to have expensive energy.
Yeah.
And in fact, well, I say Joe Biden, one of the people
His
who changes,
handlers,
yeah.
yeah.
One of the people who changes his nappy put out a tweet today saying that that he wanted he said there was no reason why America can't lead the world in manufacturing. Well, yes, there is, because to be competitive in manufacturing, you need cheap energy.
Yeah.
And it is literally Joe Biden's policy to have expensive energy. He's actually said that he wants expensive energy. His energy secretaries have gone out and said they want expensive energy because they want people to use it less. Well, you're not going to be leading in manufacturing then, are you? Yeah, so basically, it's all our fault. And at least they need to frame it. And all central bankers are doing it, not just the Bank of England. They're all doing it. They're trying to frame it as workers versus employers. As the employers are trying to put up their prices, and they're trying to hold down wages, and employers are being greedy by asking for more wages because they're trying to meet the cost of living. Curiously, the government's effect in all of this isn't noticed.
Yeah, it's been omitted, yeah.
Yeah, the inflation that they're generating, which is robbing us of our purchasing power, that isn't getting there. The taxes that are in there are not going in there. So according to this narrative, we weren't greedy 3 years ago, but now we are. And, has anything else happened in that last 3-year period? Let's have a look at this. So this is the M2 money supply. So this is the amount of money that was out there in the UK, and look at that!
Takes off like a rocket after about December 2019 for some.
Yes.
Someone, in the words of Tom Harwood, something happened.
Yes. Yeah, so all of that extra money has sort of got geysered into existence under the excuse that it's a pandemic and therefore, you pay no attention to this. And it was remarkable. Remarkable looking back. We had this pandemic come along, and I was initially a bit concerned because I was on top of this, and then we got the Crises data, and I thought, oh, hang on a minute, there's actually nothing to be worried about. So I stopped worrying about it, and then all of a sudden they started printing a vast amount of money and bringing in authoritarian measures. Wow, yeah. Colour me surprised by that one. Anyway, so the amount of money has been increased, and what has that done? Well, let's have a look at Trueflation. So I'm not going to go. If you can change it from the US to the UK. So what this website, just above there, yeah, that's it. So what this website does is they basically run their own calculation of what inflation is because the official number is doctored.
Right, and they're putting it at 15.60% at the moment.
Yes. Now, a couple of points to make on that. First of all, the only reason why that is as low as it is because inflation is a rate of change metric. So it compares to where we were a year ago. So if you remember that this time a year ago, we already had a lot of inflation. That was already when we saw gas prices going up significantly, and inflation was it this time last year? Maybe 6%, something like that. And because inflation is a rate of change metric, it's like acceleration. If you start out from the lights, you cruise up to the lights, and then you floor the accelerator. You might have sort of 50% in acceleration once you get going, but then after a while the acceleration craps out because you don't end up at light speed, do you? The acceleration, but you're still going really fast, and that's the same with inflation. Is the rate of change will only start to or look like it's slowing down because the comparables from 12 months earlier are themselves so high that the inflation number comes down, but the price level is still massively high. So the fact that we've got 15% inflation even after the comparables of last year, which were themselves excessively high, tells you we've got a massive problem. And it's certainly above the reported figure that the Bank of England is coming out with at 10%. So, why is it that we're in this situation? Well, I found an absolutely brilliant little video on Twitter, which it's about 3 minutes long, and I wouldn't normally play this sort of stuff in full, but it was so good I thought I have to. So let's see what this guy says.
The central bankers of the world, apparently losing confidence that they can fix the inflation they created, are turning to Plan B. Blame the rest of us so we fight each other. Yesterday, the chief economist of the Bank of England, one Hugh Pill, said the quiet part out loud that, quote, British households and businesses need to accept they are poorer and stop seeking pay increases and pushing prices higher. Note, inflation in the UK is currently running double digits, with grocery prices up 19% year on year. So not seeking a raise may well mean cutting a meal. Meanwhile, a poll from a major British insurer found 57% of small businesses in Britain are at risk of closure from rising prices. So you plebes need to drop a meal and maybe close the family business so we can keep stealing from you. According to The Guardian, central bankers actually have a name for this scapegoating: greedflation, as in double-digit inflation has nothing to do with central bankers printing up trillions and handing it to governments, bankers, and surely by accident, to the rich at the fastest pace in 50 years. In fact, last year, 1 in 4 pounds in existence and almost 1 in 3 dollars had been printed in just the previous 3 years. But you see, that was all a sheer coincidence. What's really happening here is that for some bizarre reason, everybody got really greedy. We weren't greedy before, mind you, but now we are, and it's got to stop. The beauty of the greedflation excuse is not only does it dodge blame for central bankers' institutionalized pillaging, it sets the masses against one another, whilst the elite use their central banks to thieve away. And they're quite open about this. A couple weeks ago, the European Central Bank put out a tweet asking, quote, what really drives inflation, profits or wages? So, get it, voter? Is it the greedy right-wing capitalist, or is it the greedy left-wing unions? Now, they do this because if they can get half the country to blame the other half, the bankers and the bureaucrats who actually cause the problems are off the hook. They can get back to siphoning away all of our life savings and future prospects whilst we fight. It's almost enough to make you wonder if maybe Americans or Britons or Europeans don't actually hate each other, that perhaps we actually agree the system is broken, but our elite does everything they can to set us against one another. This divide the masses campaign has been going on for a long time, certainly since the founding of the Federal Reserve. Indeed, ever since Western governments took on an activist role that converted them from responsible custodians of the common good, fixing potholes, dredging ports, the sort of night watchman state, and turned them into existential political footballs in service to the elite and to be weaponized against the masses. They ran this playbook perfectly last financial crisis, setting the right populist Tea Party and the left populist Occupy movement, turning them away from bankers who had just pillaged the country and turning them against each other. They will, no doubt, try again. And your part in all this? Make do with less, take one for the team, fight against your neighbor so the elite can go on robbing all of us and all of our children blind. All right, we'll be watching. See you next time.
He's absolutely right about the divide and conquer agenda that was waged on the Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street. Tim Paul's talked about this from the on-the-ground perspective before. What ended up happening was lots of agent provocateurs came into the Occupy camp and started dividing it up into intersectional grievance constituencies. And then all of the corporate press outlets started reporting an exponential rate about transphobia, racism, homophobia, misogyny, all of these intersectional buzzwords.
I remember it well at the time. For about 2-3 weeks, right and left were in total alignment.
Yes.
We were all looking at the banks, the system of government. We were basically all focused on the right target. And then all of a sudden, identity politics got massive corporate sponsorship from the top. It was... I mean, it was so noticeable at the time that suddenly something changed and they managed to steer the left away. And then because the right basically defined themselves as being not whatever the left is for, we ended up just fighting.
Yeah, this is why it's fair to conceptualize ESG's, environmental social governance scores, for those that don't know, as a kind of tithe to a new religion, sure. But you could also see it more cynically as Larry Fink would quite like to create an ideological hegemony to cement market capture. And that's a really easy way of ensuring if you're all infighting about woke stuff, you're not actually looking at material system restructure that would dethrone him.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what it was. Look, I'm going to give you... So that was brilliant. I should get the guy on economics at some point. So a number of good points he made there. 57% of small businesses in the UK at the risk of closure. Remarkable. And that's why I started this segment with, I was a bit ill and I basically just sat there in a chair. I didn't destroy the world in the process, but for some reason we had to do that. Well,
That's why there's so many cash barbershops opening up from brand new immigrant entrepreneurs, because they're the only ones that aren't paying any tax and are going off the grid.
yeah, well, good for them. With the greedflation idea, absolutely, as we just talked about, set one against each other, and I always love reiterating that point that he made in there. £1 in £4 got printed in the last few years. $1 in $3 got printed in the last couple of years. Is it any wonder that we're experiencing inflation? And in fact, I want to hone down on that inflation lie aspect of it. But first of all, I'm going to give you a quote from Olivia Blanchard, who is the chief economist at the International Monetary Fund. She said, inflation is fundamentally the outcome of a distribution conflict between firms, workers, and taxpayers. It stops when the various players are forced to accept the outcome. This is a lie. That is not what inflation is. And the only reason they're able to get away with this is because they have changed the meaning of the word inflation over the last couple of decades. So I'll put this challenge to you. If you have in your house an old dictionary, something from, maybe even the 80s, but certainly any earlier than that, go and look at it and see what inflation is defined as. And it is defined as the expansion of the money supply. And then what we talk about now, what they used to call price rises, are the consequence. Because, of course, if there is more money sloshing around, if you play a game of Monopoly and you at some random point, you basically just give everybody double the amount of money. I mean, you get that effect by going around a number of times anyway. Stuff starts bidding up. You start paying more for the same amount of stuff. It's the same. If there are more pounds and dollars in circulation, then asset prices go up. But the other thing it does is it lowers the real value of debt. Because, of course, if you borrow £100 from me, it matters very much whether you're borrowing £100 from me today, 10 years ago, or 10 years' time, because of that inflation effect, the real ability to pay that back. So let's have a look at this website. This is World Debt Clock. Now, this gives you a list of the amount of debt that are in various countries. So you can see at the top there, that's the US, where basically the debt, it's the same for the UK, actually. The debt is basically 100% of GDP. And this is what I've talked about a number of times, is if the amount of debt is same size as the economy, then it becomes very simple. What's growing faster, the debt or the economy? And if the debt is growing faster, then you're in a debt spiral that basically leads you to a bad place, because the cost of the debt is about 4% and the economy is growing about 1.5%. So therefore the debt is always going to get larger than the economy. And that is just the debt that's the official debt. That's the amount of money that we've already borrowed. The UK and the US has other obligations, such as they got Medicare, they got Social Security. We've got the same things, where we've got a whole series of payments that are basically booked into law that we are going to have to make. That is going to be guaranteed future borrowings. And when you add that up as well, we are well past 100% debt at this point. This system cannot be resolved without them finding a bag holder. Now, this is a phenomena that happens regularly in history. So, that's the reason why I showed that Epochs at the beginning of this segment, the one that I did with Bo, because we talked about past financial crises, and they always have the same dynamic. And we've had we go right back to the early days in that particular segment. But we had 1637, we had 1797, we had 1819, 1837, 1857, 1884. 1901, 1929, 1937, 1974, 1987, 1992, 2000, 2008, and then now. What happens is the debt builds up and it gets to the point where it cannot be paid back without it getting pushed onto somebody and somebody taking massive losses. Now, why do I mention those previous dates? Because what has happened in all of those previous times is, it's not the elite. It's basically the masses are the bag carrier, and they get regularly wiped out because we have this debt-based system where everybody just gets carried away and over-leveraged. Now, the only difference is this time is we have a well-developed social media. We have independent media. So this time, unlike all those other times that I mentioned, you get to find out that they are going to be robbing us, and we get to talk about it in advance, so we can shine a spotlight on these people as they do it, and we can call bullshit on them when they start saying stuff like the Bank of England is saying at the moment.
We hope you enjoyed that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters. If you did enjoy, you can go to our website and get the podcast in full for free, and also pay as little as £5 a month to get access to all of our premium content and help us keep the lights on. Series such as mine and Harry's Comics Corner, where in this episode we took a look at the first part of Berserk, that is the Black Swordsman and Golden Age arc, with the second part to come. If you'd like to find out all the rest of the content that we're putting out, you can follow us at LotusEaters_com on Twitter and on Getter. Until next time, goodbye.